going to keep it real, and it may come across brutally honest, but a lot of people will say, Pastor, how do I hear from God? Well, one thing is for sure. You're not going to hear from God if you're not in the Word of God. You know, the hard truth is that so many people today want the fruit without the root. Oh, we want the kindness and the goodness and the blessings of Jesus, but we don't want the cross. We don't want the lordship, and we don't want the obedience. You know, welcome to day 15 of This is Jesus, and this is a tough one because Jesus sat down and had a meal with a guy named Zacchaeus, and he said, I have come to seek and save the lost. That was Zacchaeus, and that's also me, and well, technically that's also you. But you know, my problem is that I come to know Christ at 16, and he found me, he sought me, he found me, he saved me, but then I acted like none of that ever happened. I acted like I was still lost. I was found, but acting like I was lost. And I did that for several years, and partially because there were so many people that started throwing all these religious things at me rather than encouraging relationship with Jesus. So I got frustrated, set it down, walked away. Thankfully, I come back to that. But as a pastor, one of the things that I see that's a major problem among Christians today is that so many people that confess to be Christians don't even really know who Jesus is. They've not taken the time to dig into the Word of God and to find out who Jesus is for themselves. We're still living off of a word from grandma or from a pastor, and we're relying on other people's opinions or other people's experiences when Jesus is calling us to go deeper. You know, they say that of the 5 million people that visit the Grand Canyon per year, 5 million, 5% or less actually go below the rim. But you know, they say that less than 1% actually go to the floor of the canyon. Now, what's that got to do with your relationship with Jesus? Well, do you know that new studies have shown that 5% or less of people who profess to be Christians actually are in the Word of God on a daily basis? You know what that means? We are settling for what's on the surface. And you know what's on the surface? Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. Sometimes it's a lot of religion, sometimes it's tradition, sometimes it's legalism. But Jesus is calling us to go deeper. We want the fruit, but we don't want the root. And Jesus is calling us to go deeper so that we can develop a root that will produce fruit. You know, let me give you a good example of this happening. And this is a story of our own church, how this church started years ago. You know, there was a lady named Frances, little sweet lady, had grown up in church, had been in church all her life. Wonderful lady, had always done the right thing, you know, never said bad words, all these things, you know, went to church all the time, every time the door's open. But when she approached about 40 years old or so, she realized that she had never read the Bible. She had been in church all of her life. She professed to be a Christian, but she had never read the Word of God for herself. She played the piano. She played the organ for multiple churches. But she had never read the Word of God. And, you know, she said, you know what? I'm just going to start reading the Word of God. So she started in the Gospels, and she started just getting to know Jesus. And if you haven't read the Word, I would recommend you do the same thing. But she said almost immediately she saw where Jesus had healed a blind man. You know what's crazy is that at that time she was blind in one eye. And she said, I thought, well, if he could do it for him, why couldn't he do it for me? So she began to just be crazy and pray that Jesus would heal her blindness. And you know, a few days later, she woke up and she could see out of that eye. Now, there was a series of things happen, like a pastor that was trying to explain it off as something else. The doctor was also explaining it off. Everybody's trying to eliminate God from this. But she wasn't going to settle. She said God was calling her to deeper places. She had settled for what was on top. And Jesus began to call her to deeper places. Maybe you're that Christian today. Maybe you're angry at me. You can be angry all you want to. But it's worth it if you begin to get into the Word of God for yourself. Don't take my word for it. You dig in. You go deeper. Be the 1% that goes to the floor of the canyon and experiences things that no one else has ever experienced. Love you.